Okay, so good morning. Today's daf is daf mem in Shevuot. We are near the bottom of Lamed Tet Amabet, and we had discussed yesterday a machlokes between Rav and Shmuel with respect to the nature of denial that needs to, a partial denial that needs to happen in order to trigger an oath. That we saw that when it comes to Rav says that you need to, that the amount of the denial in order to trigger an oath needs to be equal to 2 silver moes. And so as a result, that without a sufficiently large denial, we are not going to make the person swear. And so obviously the size of the denial tells you that the size of the claim needs to be even larger than that. Indeed, it needs to be at least one pruta larger than that. And we have, whereas Shmuel says no. Shmuel says that even if you deny the amount of a pruta, the smallest denomination or the smallest meaningful denomination, that is sufficient to trigger an obligation to swear if you partially admit. And so that's the back and forth that Rav and Shmuel have. And we saw that according to the Mishnah, you could argue that it makes a little bit more sense according to Rav, because it never says specifically that the denial of a pruta is sufficient. It always says just the admission of a pruta is sufficient. And everybody agrees that the admission of a pruta is sufficient. The question is what needs to be left over? And so as a result, maybe you could argue that the Mishnah supports Rav. And the psukim, because the natural read of them says kesef o kelim, which we understand because kelim is plural. We understand that the kesef must also be plural. So that, and plural means two. So as a result, it's got to be at least two. And so, and we say ki huzeh in the pasuk that says that the person's admitting it. He's saying, this is all I got. And so what he's saying is that this is all I've got, and it comes out of the 2 silver coins. Well, out of two, if you take 2 silver coins and subtract anything, well, then what the denial ends up being less than 2 silver coins. And so that's how the psukim seem to fit more with Shmuel. Now, each one, again, can explain the other. One can say, with respect to the Mishnah, it's just not telling us that law, but that law is the case. And with respect to the psukim, we actually dealt with in detail yesterday, at the end of the day yesterday, where Rav explains that essentially, because the Torah didn't need to write kesef, we're going to understand that the 2 kesef is not about the claim, but is rather about the denial, using the principle of im eino inyan. So yesterday we had one effort to prove one effort to prove Rav from our Mishnah, and then we're going to say, okay, so now let's see if we can make some proofs in various directions. So and so we ended yesterday by noting that we then, after trying to prove Rav from our Mishnah, we then challenged Shmuel and said, well, what about the end of the Mishnah where it says, maybe we'll just go back to that and we'll use that as the starting place, even though we got a little bit further. So we'll go to 1, 2, 3, 5 lines down in the wide lines on Lamed Tet Amud Aleph, 4th word from the end of the line. Ihachi, if you're going to tell me that the claim and the admission are for the amount of metal of the specified coins, and therefore it's not about it's not about it's about the specific metals involved, and it's not about their value. Well, aim a seifa. What about the end? Shtei kesef upruta yeshli biyadcha. If one person says that I've got, that you owe me 2 silver coins and a pruta, and the person responds, Ein lecha biyadi ela pruta, I only have a pruta, chayav. Our Mishnah says that you're obligated. Now, amrat bishlam ashava, if you say that you're all talking about the value of the item, well, then it all makes sense because that's a partial admission. I'm saying that if we say that each silver coin is worth, let's say, a dollar and a pruta is a penny, so I'm saying you owe me $2 and 1 penny, and you say you owe me a penny. So it's all part of the same currency. So as a result, that's a partial admission. Mishum hachi chayav, that's why you'd be liable. But if you tell me, no, if you say that our Mishnah is talking about the metals and it's the key is that the metals are what's key, well, then when I'm asking you for 2 silver coins and 1 copper coins, amai chayiv, why, when you admit to the copper coin, are you going to be liable? Mashitano, when I demanded something, namely the silver that I demanded, lo hodalo, you didn't admit any of that. Umasha hodalo, and what you agreed to, lo tano, that is not, I didn't demand more than that 1 copper coin. You agreed that you owed me 1 copper coin. That's all I asked from you in terms of copper. So there is no moda b'miktsas here. So why should our Mishnah conclude that it's swearing? Doesn't this show that it has to be about value? So midihu daima ela l'shmuel. No. The point is that we can still say, according to Shmuel, that this is talking about coinage, because that is talking about that we're talking about the specific metals. Because if I make a claim of several different metals, or if I make a claim of several different kinds of grains, or if I make a claim of, 2 different things completely, midi dehu taima ela l'shmuel, because who are we trying to explain this to? We're explaining it to Shmuel, and ha'amar Rav Nachman amar Shmuel, and Rav Nachman said in the name of Shmuel, Tano chitin usa orin, that if somebody were to claim that you owe them wheat and barley, and you admit to owing one of them, we do not treat those 2 claims as if they're separate metals or separate items, and therefore each one is viewed individually, but rather we view it as a whole, and you've admitted to part of the overall amount, even though you admitted to all of one of the materials, chayav. And according to Shmuel, you are still obligated to swear. And so as a result, even if you say that it's silver and copper specifically that we're dealing with, that if somebody makes a claim for 2 silver coins and 1 copper coin, and you only admit to the copper coin, you're going to be liable for an oath, according to Shmuel, based on moda b'miktsas, because you've admitted part of it. And hachinam mistabra. Now we're going to say, and you know what? This also makes sense, because midikatani seifa. And so now we're effectively turning things around again and saying, hey, doesn't this support Shmuel? Because what did we say at the end of our Mishnah? Litra zahav yeshli biyadcha. I have a litra of gold in your possession. Ein lecha biyadi ela litra b'kesef. And then the person responds, no, you only have silver. And so patur, the person's exempt, because clearly there's 1 metal that's being claimed, 1 metal that's being admitted. They don't match, and therefore it's not going to be subject to moda b'miktsas. So amar bishlam adavka katani. Now, if it makes sense, if you say that we're talking about the gold itself, and we're talking about the metal itself, mishum hachi pater, that's why you're exempt. But ela amrat shava. But if you say that we're talking about currency, and we're all the cases in our Mishnah, which is how Rav was understanding our Mishnah, then how am I pater? Why are you exempt? Litra tuva havi. A litra has a high value, and so as a result, when you admit to the litra of silver, the difference in the claim and the admission is well more than the 2 silver coins that, according to Rav, there needs to be. So as a result, doesn't it show that it must be that must be specifically detailing the metal. So elamid seifa dafka reisha nami dafka lemitahave tiyufta derav. So this should all be a refute of Rav from our Mishnah. No, not necessarily. Amar lach Rav. Rav would say to you, Kula masnis and Shabbat. No, really, our entire Mishnah is talking about the monetary value, with the except the litra zahav shiny, but the litra of gold is different. That one is not. As Rashi says, last Rashi on Lamed Tet Bet, Dekevan Detanu Mishkal, because he specifically makes a claim associated with a weight. Vadai Davka Katani. That's the one case where we're going to say that that was intended to be specific about the particular metal. Aval kol matbos. But when we're talking about coinage, Demasnisin in our Mishnah, Shavakamar. There we're talking about the equivalency, the value associated with Shederach Matbe'ela Soto Damim L'Kol Dvarim. Because coinage has general value. It's not viewed like a metal. This, and so as a result, that's why that one case is different. Teda. So now again, we go back and forth. Now we're going to try and support Rav. The kaktani seifa, when it says in the end, dinar zahav li biyadcha, ein lecha biyadi ela dinar kesef, utresus ufundion ufruta chayav. Well, and we have, that must be the case because the last case of our Mishnah says that if you claim a dinar of zahav, so again, as opposed to a weight of zahav, you claim a particular kind of coinage in gold, and then the person responds, "No, I've got a silver coin or various other coins, but I didn't owe you a gold coin." Well, then chayav, he's going to be liable. Shakol min matbeya achadhein, because all coinage is considered one type of thing. So amrat bishlama shava. So now it seems that everything makes sense if you tell me that the entire Mishnah is talking about value. Mishum hachi chayev. That's why you're liable. Ela'i amrat davka. But now we go back to Shmuel and say, Shmuel, you wanted to say that our Mishnah was talking about the specific coin. Amai chayev, why are you liable? Here, the specific coin claimed was gold, and the admitted claims were of silver or copper. So, Amar Rebbe Lazar, b'shitano b'dinar matbos. No, the point is that because he specifically says that he wants a coin of dinar, the kamash malan, de pruta beklal matbeya isa. And what we're teaching is that a pruta is considered a kind of coin. And so exactly as Rav did with respect to the litra case, and say that that's the exception that proves the rule, so too Shmuel would do with this coin, with the gold dinar case, and say that's the exception that proves the rule, that all other cases we're talking about specific values, specific metals. But in this case, once we reference the dinar, then we're talking about the value. So daikanami, and you can specify that because dikatani shakol min matbeya achat, because the Mishnah concludes by saying all coins are one category. So the Rav, and what would Rav do with that? Because after all, shakol min matbeya achat seems very much like Shmuel's interpretation of our Mishnah is more accurate. No, he would say shakol din matbeya achat. He would say that no, it's telling us that they all have the law of the same thing. And so as a result, the Mishnah is teaching even an admission of pruta obligates the person to swear because it is considered coinage. So as a result, we've gone back and forth, and so we've not successfully proven. We're not yet done, but now let's take a look and see what about Rebbe Lazar, because we just mentioned that Rebbe Lazar defended Shmuel's interpretation of the Mishnah. So the Rebbe Lazar, lema midiseifa kishmuel mitaretz, Reisha nami kishmuel svirale. Since he just explained how Shmuel could explain the end of our Mishnah, maybe it means that he agrees with Shmuel with respect to the beginning of the Mishnah. Lo seifa dafka. No, it could just be the last part of our Mishnah. Dekatanisha kol min matbea achat. Because that's where we specifically say that it's all type of one coin. So as a result, he understands the end of the Mishnah certainly like Shmuel would, but we've shown already that it works according to both of them. But Bereisha Karav, Shmuel, but in the beginning of the Mishnah, he can understand it in either direction, and so as a result, you can't tell me that Rabbi Elazar necessarily agrees with Rav or Shmuel, unable to bring a definitive proof. Tashma. So now again, another effort to prove Rav's interpretation for our Mishnah. Dinar zahav, zahuv li biyadcha. We're going to use a brisa. The brisa specifically says where a dinar of zahav, a gold dinar, zahuv, that is minted gold, li biyadcha. So ein lecha biyadi ela dinar kesef. And if the person says back that you only have a dinar of gold, of silver in my possession, chayav, you're going to be liable. So I might have thought that this brisa supports Rav. Taima, what's the reason that we're going to focus on the specific claim? De amrle zahav zahuv. It's because you say it's specifically a gold minted coin. But hastama, if you were to just say dinar zahav, then I might have thought shava ka'amar, you're referring to value. And of course, value is how Rav interpreted our Mishnah as okay, so let's see. Rashi explains how this is a proof to Rav. If we take a look at the Rashi, we're on Memam and Aleph 1, 2, 3, 6 from the top of the narrow lines in Rashi, about 12, 13 lines down. It says dinar zahav zahuv yesh li biyadcha ein lecha biyadi ela dinar kesef chayiv. Perish dinar zahuv hainu tavua. That when we say dinar zahuv, we mean a specific coin. The taima mishum da kol min matbeya achad, and that's because all coinage is one thing. V'havale mamon, and it's really min hatana, and therefore, when you admit to another kind of coin, it's all one thing. It's all coinage. Umia siyata d'Ravhu, and this is a proof to Rav. Miditzterich leperushe zahav zahuv. From the fact that we need to specifically say that it's a golden minted coin, miklal de masnisen de tanana dinar zahav stama shavakamar. So in our Mishnah, when we say dinar zahav, we're saying specifically that it could be any kind of value. It doesn't have to specifically be a coin. Shal kol din matbeya echad, because after all, as we said, every kind of coinage is one category. Tani. Umidiseifa shava reisha nami shava. And so as a result, we can say that just as the end of the Mishnah is talking about the value and not the specific metal, so too when we talk about in the beginning, we'll talk about the value and not the specific metal. V'katani reisha shtei kesef yesh li biyadcha. And so as a result, we can say, when we say that there are 2 kesef in your hand, and ein lecha biyadi ela pruta, and the person responds back, no, all I've got is a pruta, patur. And we said that in our Mishnah, we said that that's exempt. V'al kain mishum deleka kfirishte kesevu. And so why would that be the case? It is the case because you're not accepting, you're not agreeing, you're not denying 2 silver coins in value, because the claim was 2 silver coins, the admission was a pruta, so the denial is only 2 silver claims minus a pruta. That doesn't meet the threshold, according to Rav, and that's why in our Mishnah we're going to say that you aren't obligated to swear. So doesn't the fact that in this other brisa we specifically say that a minted gold or dinar is is talking about specifically the metal, and we're going to say that and so as a result, it's a demand for the specific kind of coin. And so Amar Rav Ashi, and so as a result, in our Mishnah, we should understand it the way Rav understands it, and not according to Shmuel. So Amar Rav Ashi, Hachi Kamar, Kol HaOmer Dinar Zahav, Ka'omer Dinar Zahav Zahuv Dami. No, what the Brisa is telling us is that if you say that you're owed a dinar zahav, it's like you're saying that you're owed a minted dinar zahav, meaning that you're owed a minted coin of gold, and it's definitely about the value. So the point is that this all it can work even according to Shmuel. And so when it said, because it references the specific coin in the Mishnah, Shmuel says that this is the one exception. It's the exception that proves the rule. This is the one case where we say that it's talking about general value, and every other case, it's according to Shmuel, it's talking about the specific metal. Okay, another effort to prove Tani Rabbi Chia li Rav. We're going to try and now bring a proof to Rav that in fact, again, the denial needs to be of 2 silver coins. Sela biviyadcha, you owe me a sela. Ein lecha biyadi ela sela chasar beis kesef. You only, and the person says, no, all I've got of yours is a sela minus 2 silver mos. So chayev. So chasar, but if it chasar ma, but if I said it was 2 silver coins less 1 ma, patur, then you're exempt. And so as a result, this seems to be how we conclude. We found a brisa that is definitively consistent with Rav. And so as a result, in this case, we're going to paskin like Rav, that the denial, in order to fulfill a situation of moda b'miktzas, the denial itself needs to be 2 silver mos. And it's not enough for the denial to be anything less than that. Okay. Amar of Nachman bar Yitzchak, Amar Shmuel. So we now have another rule according to Shmuel. Lo shanu ela betanas malvav dalova. That this entire discussion is all talking about where we're talking about a lender-borrower relationship. Aval tanas malva v'ha'adas eid echad. And a partial admission case. But when you have the claim of a lender with a single witness, even if the claim is smaller than the 2 silver coins, we're going to say that you're obligated to swear. My timer, what's the reason? Dixiv. Because what's the source what's the source? So let's take a look. It's in Dvarim Perek Yutet Pasuk Tesvav. Lo yakum eid echad b'ish l'chol avon u'l'chol chatas. A single witness cannot come against anybody for a punishment or a penalty. Is how it's defined here, but a sin offering. Basically, there's no way you can. It's talking about positive and negative prohibitions. L'chol avon. It's for those situations that you're not going to be able to get somebody to testify. But aval kamhu l'shvua. But what it can do is it can make somebody have to take an oath. V'tanya, and we have a brisa. Kol makom sheshnayim mechayven otel mamon. Whenever 2 people would make you obligated to pay money, one witness is sufficient to make you have to take an oath. So that's a very quick aside, but that's basically it in terms of the power of one witness in this context. So again, this perek is all talking about all the different kinds of oaths, the 3 main biblical kinds of oaths that somebody is potentially liable for in court, where the court will make you swear. Moda b'miktzas, eid echad, and pikadon, and a situation where something happened to the thing you're watching. V'amar Rav Nachman Amar Shmuel. So now another rule in the name that Rav Nachman said in the name of Shmuel. Tanochitin us orin. If somebody claims wheat and barley, v'hodolo be'echad mehen, and you admit to owing one of them, chayav. That is considered a moda b'miktas, even though you're admitting to all of the wheat or all of the barley. Since the person claimed both wheat and barley, that's sufficient for you to have to swear. Amar lo Rabbi Yitzchak, Yashar, great job. V'chein Amar Rabbi Yochanan. That's what Rabbi Yochanan said also. Miklal de Paligale Reish Lakish. Well, 1 second, does that imply that Reish Lakish disagreed? No, not necessarily. Ika de Amre Misha Hahava Shahe Le, that Reish Lakish would wait for Rabbi Yochanan to finish his class, finish what he was saying, B'shazikle, and he would stay silent until he was finished. And Rashi explains that he would stay silent and wait until Rabbi Yochanan was finished before arguing with him, which teaches us a very nice midah of how we should behave. We shouldn't interrupt people. And that point is, and the point is that when was that Rabbi Yitzchak, according to Rashi, left the Beit Midrash, but before Rabbi Yochanan was finished speaking. And so as a result, he didn't know whether Reish Lakish disagreed. He was only able to say that he knew that Rabbi Yochanan agreed. Ika de Amre Mishta Havashasile, that what Reish Lakish was drinking at the time, Vishasik, and that's why he was quiet. And so again, could be that he was drinking in order to prevent himself from responding. But the bottom line is that Rabbi Yitzchak left the Beit Midrash and therefore was unable to say for sure whether Reish Lakish agreed or didn't agree. So we're going to try now we're going to try a total of 3 times to prove one way or the other, to see whether Shmuel is right that when it comes to a partial admission where you claim 2 things and one of them gets denied and one gets accepted, whether that is sufficient to cause somebody to swear. So let's say that our Mishnah supports Rav Shmuel, because Tanor Chitin, if you claim wheat, but you respond with barley, Patur, you're going to be exempt. But Rabbi Gamliel says that you're obligated. And Rabbi Gamliel Mechayev, Rashi tells us at the bottom, he does not require any kind of admission from the nature of the item, as long as you admit to something, even if it's completely unrelated. I could claim from you televisions, you could claim, respond, no, I borrowed 3 pens. That's going to be, according to Rabbi Gamliel, sufficient to make you liable to swear. But the point is that we see the Tanochitin v'hodelo b'sorin. What's our Mishnah saying? You had to claim one, and the admission is of something completely different. What's the implication? If you had claimed both wheat and barley, and you would have admitted to one of them, chayav, you would have been obligated. Isn't that what our Mishnah is hinting at and implying? Lo, not necessarily. No, really, even if it was wheat and barley, nami patur, you would also be exempt. And the fact that we say what the law is in connection with when somebody claims wheat and admits barley, that's because we want to show how powerful Rabbi Gamliel is, because we're talking about making an oath. And so as a result, we want to show how powerful Rabbi Gamliel is. So as a result, we have not proven Shmuel. So Tashma, we try again to prove Shmuel, now from our Mishnah. Tanu Kalim v'karkos, if you claim utensils and land, v'hodola b'kalim, and you admit to the vessels, the kafar b'karkos, but you deny the land. B'karkos, you admit to the land, the kafar b'kalim, and deny the utensils. Well, then patur, you're going to be exempt, because land can't be the basis for your swearing. Hoda b'mikts of karkos, and even if you admit to part of the land, patur, you're going to be exempt. B'miktsas kalim, but if you admit to part of the kalim, chayab, then you're going to be liable. And not only are you going to be liable for, as we turn to Mem Amabet, not only are you going to be liable for the swearing in connection with the denied vessels, but you're also going to be required to swear about the land. So, but again, what's the implication is Taima, the reason for all these rules is the Kalim V'Karkos. You claimed vessels and land. De Karka La Bas Shvuahi. And that's all because the land is not something that you can make an oath on. Ha kalim v'kalim. But if you were to choose instead two different kinds of kalim, or wheat and barley, for example, dumya de kalim v'karkos, it would be similar to kalim and karkos in a manner that was discussed in our Mishnah with respect to vessels and land. Chayav, you would be chayav, because that's why our Mishnah specifically said land and vessels, because we wanted to give you an example where it would not be liable. No, huadin. Really, maybe you could say that actually the same law would apply. You would also be exempt based on the principle of, meaning disagreeing with Shmuel. You could argue that maybe our Mishnah would still say you're exempt because you didn't accept, even though you admit to part of what was claimed, you didn't admit to part of any single material. So, and Vahadakatani Kalim B'Karkos, and the reason our Mishnah specifically teaches vessels and land, Kamash Mlantiki Hoda B'Miktos Kalim Chayav Af Al HaKarkos, because you admitted to part of the utensils, you're going to have to swear even with respect to the land. So the Gemara says, 1 second, Mike Kamashmal on Zokakin, you're telling me that this Mishnah is teaching us the principle of Zokakin, that if you have to swear about one thing, you can be required to swear about something else. Tanina, we've got a specific Mishnah. This Mishnah is in Kedushin, and the Gemara, it's quoted in Bava Metzia a couple of times, and so as a result, we've seen it not too long ago. That when you have a situation that you have real property, you can end up taking an oath about it. If you have movable property that creates an oath obligation, so you can then also swear about the real property. So why, we already taught that. So why do we need our Mishnah to teach us? So ha'ikar, this is the key location, because here we're actually talking about oaths. Hahi, over there, that Gemara wasn't talking about oaths. Agav Gurara Naspa, that it just took it by this way, because there, there we were taught, as Rashi says, Agav Naspa, Agav Gurara Naspa, 1, 2, 3, 7, 8 lines down in the 7 lines down in the narrow lines on Memamid Bet, excuse me. Agav Gurara Naspa. Over there, because we were talking about movable property, niknin im nechasim sheyesh lahem makrayas, that they could be acquired with property, with real property, b'kesef, using money, below Mashicha, without any kind of picking up or pulling or dragging, etc. Because essentially, if you have movable property on a piece of real estate and you buy the real estate, you can, through that purchase of real estate, also buy the movable property that is on the real estate. So Tani, because of that connection, Tani Bahadayu Sha'avahim Zokikin Esanechasim Sheyesh Lahem Achrayas Lishvua. That it also works in the other direction. That just as the land could also an acquisition of land could also include movable property, in the opposite direction, an oath about movable property can also require you to swear about land. And so it wasn't a core discussion there. But here, this is where we're talking about oaths. And so that's why the Mishnah wanted to specifically mention this requirement here. Okay. The Rabbi Chia bar Abba Rabbi Yochanan. So we said before that Rabbi Yitzchak said Yashar v'chein Amar Rabbi Yochanan, that Rabbi Yochanan agreed with Shmuel that if somebody demands wheat and barley and the person admits only one of them, that's going to be still considered moda b'mitzvahs. But listen to what Rabbi Chia bar Abba said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. If somebody claims wheat and barley, and the defendant admits only to one of them, patur, he's exempt. Bahama Rabbi Yitzchak, Yashar v'chein amar Rabbi Yochanan. But we said a few minutes ago that Rabbi Yochanan agreed with Shmuel, and now Rabbi Chia bar Abba is telling us he disagrees. So Amorai ninhu. No, it's two Amorayim be aliba de Rabbi Yochanan arguing about what Rabbi Yochanan said. We have Rabbi Yitzchak and Rabbi Chia. They're arguing about what Rabbi Yochanan said. Rabbi Chia says that Rabbi Yochanan disagrees with Shmuel, and Rabbi Yitzchak says no, Rabbi Yochanan agreed with Shmuel. And now we're going to bring the same two cases to try and support that we just tried to use to support Shmuel. We're going to use it to argue that Rabbi Yitzchak's understanding of Rabbi Yochanan is correct, because after all, Tashma Tanochitin v'hodolo b'seorin patur v'Rabbi Gamliel mechayev. Right? If you say claim wheat and admit barley, you're going to be exempt. And Rabbi Gamliel says that you're going to be obligated. This is just the repetition of the exact same lines that we had earlier in the Gemara. So we can go through it a little bit more quickly. Doesn't this show from our Mishnah that if you were to claim both wheat and barley and somebody were to admit one of them, that you would be liable? And the Gemara says no. Huadin, same law applies. Nami pater. You would also be not liable to make an oath. And that which we specifically said here, the case of barley, claiming barley and claiming wheat and responding barley, it's to tell us how powerful Rabbi Gamliel is, that even in that case, where there isn't anything, where it's clearly different minin, clearly different items, we're still going to say, because Rabbi Gamliel denies the requirement to have mimin echad, so as a result, Rabbi Gamliel would say that you are going to be liable to swear. Tashma, second proof, again from our Mishnah. Tanu kelim b'karkos. Again, if you claim land and vessels, v'hoda b'kelim, and you admit to vessels, b'kavar b'karkos, and you deny about the land, b'karkos b'kavar b'kelim, or vice versa, pater, you're going to be exempt. Hodolo b'miktas karka patur. And even if you admit to part of the land, you're going to be exempt because it's land and we don't swear about land. But miktas kalim, but if you admit to part of the vessels, chayav, you're going to be liable. Taima de kalim v'karkos. Again, isn't this all telling us about land and vessels in order to tell us the power of land? To karka la bashruahi, that because land isn't subject to oaths, ha kalim v'kalim. But if we're two kinds of vessels, dumya de kalim v'karkos, in a similar analysis to the one that we just did, chayav, you would be liable if you claim two kinds of vessels and the admission was only about one of the vessels. No, huadin, we could say it's the same rule. Dafilu kalim v'kalim, even if it were two kinds of vessels, nami patur, you would also be exempt. And this is what it's teaching us: the hodam mix of kalim, chayav afal gav afal karkos. That if in fact you make a partial admission with respect to utensils, you're going to have to swear about land as well, because because of the concept of zokikin. Well, my kamashmalan, what are you telling us this for? Zokikin, you're telling us that if you have one thing and that you have to swear for, you can add something else to the oath. Well, Tanina, we already learned that in a Mishnah in Kedushin, as we said above, Zokikin es hanechasim sheyesh lehen achrayas l'shavalayan, that movable property can cause real property to have an oath on it. Well, no, ha'ikar, hahi agav grara naspa. As we said before, that, this is the main location, that was just mentioned incidentally and not for the specific purpose. So now we offer a third effort to either support Shmuel or to refute Rabbi Chia's explanation of Rabbi Yochanan, and we say the following: Esvei Rabbi Abba bar Mamel, Rabbi Chia bar Abba. So Rabbi Abba bar Mamel asked, Tano Shor, if a person claims for the following, using the following brisa, he asked the following question: if you claim an ox, and you admit to a sheep, or vice versa, patur, the person is exempt, because what's the implication? That you didn't have the same min. So that works according to everybody. But what about the following? Tanav v'shor v'seh, if you claim both animals, and then you admit to one of them, chayav, you're liable. This shows that first of all, it shows support for Shmuel, and it shows that Rabbi Chia's understanding of Rabbi Yochanan must not be right. So Amar Lei, so so Rabbi Chia, who's the one against whom this question was asked, says Hamani Rabbi Gamliel he. No, that does not have to be a contrary proof to me, because it could be that that's Rabbi Gamliel. Because remember, Rabbi Gamliel in our Mishnah says you don't need min echad. Well, 1 second, Rabbi Gamliel afilu reisha nami. But 1 second, if you're telling me that it's Rabbi Gamliel, well, then even in the first case where the person claims an ox and the other person admits a sheep, that would be also motiv b'miktas according to Rabbi Gamliel, and so therefore you would be obligated to swear even in that case. Ela hamani. So no, 1 second. I didn't mean that it was Rabbi Gamliel. Who is it? Admon. It's Admon he. Below dechuye midechina lach. And I'm not just trying to like push you off with the answer. El Talmud Aruch hu befiv shel Rabbi Yochanan. In fact, Rabbi Yochanan would say, Hamani, who is this brisa? Admon he. It's Admon. And so as a result, Admon sort of takes an interim position and says that basically very similar to what Shmuel says. So Amar Rav Anan, Amar Shmuel, Tano Chitin, V'kadam v'hodolo b'sorim. So, and by the way, it does seem like we paskin like Shmuel on this, that if you claim a television and a pen, and the person admits to the pen, they need to swear about the television. Amar Rav Anan, Amar Shmuel, Tano Chitin, if a person demands wheat, V'kadam v'hodolo b'sorim, and the defendant immediately says, no, don't stop speaking. I owe you barley. I don't owe you any wheat. Well, then, im kema'arim, if it seems like he's tricking, meaning he's trying to get out his admission before, while it's an eino min, while it's still something that isn't included in the claim, well, then chayav, he's still going to be subject to an oath. But if in fact the person has finished his claim and he's just responding, well, then patur, then he's exempt, because he didn't respond with the same min. But Amar Rav Anan, Amar Shmuel, another law in the name of Shmuel, Tano shtei mechatin, if you demand 2 needles, and you admit to one of them, chayav. Even though those needles are not worth 2 silver mohs, you're going to be liable, because those needles have real value. And we say kelim is sufficient, even if the value isn't there. Lefikach yatsu kelim, because the point is that he did say lama shehain. The point is that whatever kind of vessels they are, that's going to be sufficient. Amar of Papa tanu kelim upruta. What happens if you claim utensils and a pruta, behodol of a kalim, the kafar bepruta, patur. If I say you owe me a pen and a pruta, and you admit to the pen and you deny the pruta, you're exempt. Hoda, because they're 2 separate, different things. Hodol bepruta, bekafar bekalim, chayav. But if you admit to the pruta and you deny the vessels, well, then you're going to be liable. Because again, when it comes to the denial, we hold like Rav. The Rav says that when it comes to a monetary denial, it needs to be 2 silver coins. And so as a result, if it's 2 silver coins, and if it's not 2 silver coins, if it's just a pruta, you're not going to be liable for an oath. But if the denial is about the pruta and the oath is about if the admission is about the pruta and the denial is about the 2 kalim, well, then chayav, then you're going to be liable, again, even if the vessels have less value than 2 silver coins, because they're 2 vessels. Chada karav, v'chada kishmuel. There's one aspect of Rav Papa's ruling that's like Rav, and one like Shmuel. The part that's like Rav is the fact that when you deny cash, it needs to be 2 silver coins. Because again, Rav is the one who says you need to have 2 silver mohs worth, and the denial of a pruta is too small, and therefore that's like Rav. And Chada Kishmuel, and one's like Shmuel, the Amar Tano Chitin Usa Orin, that he's the one who claims that if you claim both wheat and barley, and then you admit to one of them, chayav. And so as a result, if you claim a pruta and utensils and you accepted the pruta and you admitted the pruta and you denied the vessels, well, then you're going to be liable. And Tosas here explains that effectively, this is how we paskin. We paskin like Rav, according to that you need to have a denial of 2 silver coins with respect to, in order to be subject to moda b'miktzas. And we paskin like Shmuel that if you claim 2 different items, you claim televisions and pens, very different, then if you admit to one, you have to swear about the other. And as Tosfos tells us, third Tosfos on the daf, v'chein halacha, this is in fact the halacha. V'af al gav dekaimelan k'Rebbe Yochanan. Usually we say that the halacha is like Rebbe Yochanan, and we heard that Rebbe Chia said that Rebbe Yochanan disagreed with Shmuel. Legabi Shmuel chadal de Rebbe Yochanan nami chayev. We saw that according to Rebbe Yochanan, there was one opinion, namely Rebbe Yitzchak, who said that Rebbe Yochanan also said you were going to be liable if you claim 2 different items and the defendant admits to one of them. So I'll leave it to Chad Amora, according to one of the Amoras, namely Rebbe Yitzchak. V'od de Kaimelan Rav Nachman. Moreover, we generally will hold like Rav Nachman b'dinei in various monetary issues. V'od de Rav Papa de Hu Basra. Rav Papa, who is the one who made this most recent statement, he's the last person speaking. He's the later authority. Sphira Leke Shmuel. He agrees with Shmuel. V'chein Perish Rabbeinu Chanano, the Shmaisin, and Rabbi Chanano also says this way. V'chein Ikar. This is the in fact the law. The lo Kamosha Pasuk Rabbeinu Chanano b'Ksuvos. In Ksuvos he holds differently. He holds Rabbi Chia bar Abba, but that is not in fact the way we paskin. And in fact, again, we seem to paskin like Rav that when it comes to cash, the denial needs to be at least 2 silver coins in order to be subject to moda b'miktzas. And we paskin like Shmuel that if I claim 2 different items, I claim barley and I claim wheat, and you only admit to one of them, you are going to be subject to the oath of moda b'miktzas. So we will stop there, wishing everybody a wonderful day. We'll pick up, God willing, from there. Looking forward to talking to you tomorrow.